The empty shot glass slammed onto the counter, rattling against its kin as Arden Varik exhaled, slowly fighting off the buzz threatening to consume him. The dim neon lights of the Runa's rest bar cast a sickly green hue over the battered steel walls. The holoscreen above the bar flickered, its automated news cycle droning on reports of insurrection in the Vega cluster remain unverified, but the Imperial Regency urges all citizens to remain vigilant. Arden snorted, flagging the bartender for another. Poor 32 years old, washed up, forgotten, eking out an existence on the ass end of Hades Station, doing what he did best, pretending to be nothing. A sharp knock at the bar's entrance cut through the haze like a blade. Varik, a gravelly voice, called out, "We know you're in there." Arden's stiffened instincts, long buried, rising to the surface. He glanced at the exit, noted the placement of the three other patrons, none of whom looked particularly interested in the unfolding confrontation. The bartender, a scarred old Joran with cybernetic eyes, sighed and reached under the counter. "Don't make a mess this time, Varik." Arden shot him a smirk. "No promises." The door burst open. Three figures stomped in, clad in exo-augmented battle armor. The insignia of the Red Talon Syndicate glowed faintly on their breastplates. "Bounty hunters meant business." "You got the wrong guy," Arden drawled, leaning back against the bar, his fingers curling subtly around the empty shot glass. "Wrong, a brute with a reptilian maw," rumbled Uo. "Lothar blood price, 50,000 credits. You breathe air for free, but it ain't free forever." "I don't owe anyone." Arden's grip tightened, his mind split in two. The rational part knew he should run, the deeper part, the part that always acted before thought surged forward. Before he knew it, the shot glass left his hand, shattered against the first brute's eye implant, sending sparks and blood showering down. Arden launched forward faster than he had any right to be, ducking a wild punch, twisting under the second hunter's grasp, and slamming an elbow into the weak joint of his exo armor. The bounty hunter howled, dropping his weapon. Arden snatched it midair, flipped the safety, and fired the stun round, took the third merc in the chest, sending him spasming to the floor. The first two recovered fast, too fast. Arden's legs were already moving his body, carrying him toward the back exit before his brain caught up. The door exploded outward into the neon-soaked underbelly of Hades Station, the humid air thick with engine exhaust and desperation. Alarms blared, security protocols triggered by the gunfire. The Red Talons were right behind him, their footfalls heavy in pursuit. Arden took a sharp left down an alleyway, his steps guiding him through the labyrinthine corridors with an ease that unsettled him. Muscle memory of a life he didn't remember. He reached a service tunnel marked restricted area power grid containment, but the door slid open at his approach as if it had been waiting inside the chamber. A cube hovered suspended in a containment field, its surface rippling with shifting symbols. "Unauthorized presence detected," blared an automated voice. "Security response inbound." The cube pulsed, its glow intensifying. Arden took a step forward, his chest tightening. The symbols reacted violently, swirling like a living thing. Then the containment field collapsed. Arden had no time to react. The cube shot forward, slamming into his chest, searing through flesh and bone. He screamed as molten energy coursed through him, his vision blurred, his mind fracturing with a flood of memories that weren't his, or were they voices, echoes of commands, fleets burning under his will, planets reshaped by his decree, an empire at his feet. "You are the last." The truth is no longer denied. The world snapped back into focus. Arden gasped, stumbling forward, hands grasping at his chest. The cube was gone, but the symbols now burned beneath his skin, pulsing in time with his heart. He barely had time to process before the door behind him slammed open. The Red Talons had arrived, weapons drawn, but they hesitated, their eyes locked on the glowing marks spreading across his torso. Recognition flashed across their faces. One of them whispered a single word, "Warbringer." Arden didn't understand, but his body did, moving before thought could catch up. His hand raised, golden energy crackling between his fingers. The bounty hunters didn't get the chance to scream. Arden Varik was awake, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The scent of scorched metal and ozone filled the chamber as the last of the bounty hunters hit the ground, groaning, their weapons smoldering from the energy pulse that had erupted from Arden's hand. He stood there, panting, hands shaking as golden arcs of energy flickered between his fingers. The symbols on his chest pulsed again, like a second heartbeat. He staggered back against the cold steel wall. "What the hell just happened to me?" The words barely left his lips before a sharp pain lanced through his skull. More memories, not his, but his flashes of starships lined in perfect formation, planetary citadels kneeling in submission, a throne carved from a material that defied understanding. The voice from before whispered in his mind clearer, "Now the time of hiding is over." Arden forced himself to focus. The bounty hunters were still breathing, twitching, but out cold. He had to move. Station security would be coming, drawn by the unauthorized energy discharge, and if they ran his biometrics through the system, he wasn't sure what would come up anymore. His whole life had been a carefully constructed lie, a man with no past working station repair jobs, scraping by unnoticed. Now, he was something else, something terrifying. He bolted from the containment chamber, retracing his steps through the service tunnels, but this time his movements felt even sharper, more precise. Every corridor, every maintenance shaft, it was like he had a map in his head. He ducked past a security drone moments before its scanner swept through the passage. How did I know it would be there? His own thoughts felt foreign. He reached the lower docks, the one place on Hades Station where credits could get you anywhere fast as long as you didn't ask to. Many questions. His eyes locked onto a sleek gunmetal black ship docked at the far end, a modified courier vessel, but the insignia on its side was unfamiliar. It wasn't imperial, it wasn't corporate, and it wasn't red talon. The ship's boarding ramp was lowering, and at the top of it stood a woman. She was tall, her deep bronze skin marked with intricate silver tattoos, her hair braided back in a warrior's style, but it was her eyes that froze him, violet like twin stars burning bright, and watching him with an intensity that sent a shiver through his already electrified nerves. She smiled slightly. "Arden Varik, welcome back." Her voice was smooth, confident, too knowing. He slowed his steps. "Who the hell are you?" Her gaze flickered to the glowing marks on his chest, the same as they were before. She murmured, "Mostly." Arden clenched his jaw. "Before what? Who are you? What is this?" She gestured for him to follow before security arrives. "I'll explain on the way." And against all logic, his legs carried him up that ramp, the ship ceiling behind him, as the engines roared to life, as the dock fell away beneath them, and Hades Station became nothing but a shrinking speck in the void. Arden knew one thing for sure. His old life was gone, and something far bigger had just begun. The ship's engines rumbled beneath Arden's feet as the ramp sealed shut behind him. His pulse pounded in his ears, the golden symbols on his chest still glowing faintly beneath his torn shirt. He had no idea where he was going, who this woman was, or what had just happened to him. But for some reason, he followed her. The woman strode ahead, her violet eyes flickering with something unreadable. She moved with the confidence of someone who expected to be obeyed, yet she hadn't drawn a weapon, hadn't restrained him. That made Arden more nervous. "Start talking," he demanded, his voice rough as he flexed his fingers, watching the last remnants of energy dance across his skin. "Who are you? How do you know my name?" She stopped at a control panel, pressing a few glowing keys before turning to face him. "I know a lot more than your name, Arden Varik," she said, leaning against the wall like they weren't currently blasting off from a station he could never show his face on again. "I know you don't remember who you really are. I know you've spent years running from something you couldn't name. And I know that Cube didn't choose you by accident." Arden crossed his arms, eyes narrowing. "Yeah? And who exactly are you?" She tilted her head slightly, studying him before answering. "Captain Lyra Voss. And you, whether you like it or not, just became the most important person in the galaxy." Arden exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "I think you've got the wrong guy." Lyra smiled, and it wasn't a comforting expression. "That's what you'd like to believe. But the bounty hunters back there weren't just after you for money. They were after you because someone out there knows what you are. And they're terrified." He scoffed, rubbing the back of his neck, fingers grazing over the glowing symbols. "Terrified of what?" Lyra's gaze darkened. "Of what happens when you remember." The ship lurched slightly as it left Hades Station's gravity well, the hum of the hyperdrive charging filling the air. Lyra pushed off the wall and nodded toward the corridor. "You should sit down," she said. "Once we hit hyperspace, I'll tell you everything. But first, I need to know, how much do you really want the truth?" Arden hesitated. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to deny everything, to pretend that he was just a guy who got caught up in the wrong fight. But deep down, beneath the fear, beneath the confusion, something else stirred. Something ancient. He met Lyra's gaze and, for the first time in his life, spoke with absolute certainty. All of it. Lyra's expression remained unreadable for a long moment, like she was weighing his words, deciding if he was worth the truth. Then, with a slow nod, she turned and gestured for him to follow. "This way," she said, leading him down the dimly lit corridor. The ship was sleek, more advanced than any civilian transport Arden had ever seen. The walls were lined with strange glyphs, similar to the ones now burned into his skin. That unsettled him more than he cared to admit. "Nice ship," he muttered, trying to keep his nerves in check. Lyra glanced over her shoulder. "It's not mine." Arden frowned. "Then whose is it?" Instead of answering, she pressed her palm against a scanner. The door before them slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a room filled with hollow displays, navigation charts, and weapons lockers. A large circular table sat in the center, and projected above it was a holographic map of the galaxy, several sectors flashing red. Lyra stepped inside and leaned against the table. "Take a seat." Arden remained standing. "I'd rather stand." She sighed but didn't push the issue. Instead, she tapped a few controls on the panel before her. The flashing sectors expanded, displaying planetary systems Arden didn't recognize. "Everything changed 700 years ago," Lyra began. "The Lords ruled the galaxy, immortal beings with power beyond comprehension. They created entire species, shaped the stars, and waged wars that shattered civilizations. But they weren't gods. They were something else." Arden crossed his arms. "And let me guess, I was one of them?" Lyra's eyes flickered to the symbols on his chest. "The last of them." He let out a dry laugh. "Right. And I just forgot." "You didn't forget." Lyra's voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. "You erased yourself. You hid." The other lords turned on each other, tearing the galaxy apart in a war so devastating that entire histories were wiped clean. But you were different. You were the only one who fought to end the cycle. And when you realized you couldn't win, you disappeared. Arden's fingers curled into fists. The memories, the flashes of ships, of burning worlds, of a throne he couldn't place, had been coming faster since he touched the cube. He wanted to deny it, to tell Lyra she was insane. But deep down, a part of him already knew. "How do you know all this?" he asked, his voice quieter now. Lyra hesitated before answering. "Because my people have been watching. Waiting. We knew the day would come when the last Lord would awaken. We just didn't know if he'd be our savior or our destruction." Arden stared at her, his pulse hammering. "And what do you think?" Lyra held his gaze. "I think you haven't decided yet." The ship's comm system crackled to life before he could respond. "Incoming transmission. Unidentified vessel on intercept course." Lyra's expression darkened. "They found us faster than I expected." Arden instinctively stepped toward the control panel. "Who?" Lyra tapped a few commands, bringing up the external cameras. A massive warship loomed in the distance, sleek and predatory, its hull lined with glowing blue sigils. Arden didn't recognize it, but the moment he saw it, his chest burned, the symbols on his skin reacting. Lyra saw his reaction. "You know them, don't you?" Arden clenched his jaw, his mind racing. He didn't know how, but yes, he did. "They're not here to talk," he said grimly. The warship's weapons powered up. The hunt had begun. The warship loomed closer, its energy cannons charging with an eerie blue glow. Arden's heart pounded as memories flickered like wildfire in his mind. Battles waged in forgotten centuries, fleets reduced to dust, entire worlds kneeling or burning at his command. This ship wasn't just an enemy. It was a remnant of his past. Lyra moved swiftly, fingers flying across the control panel. "They'll try to disable us first," she muttered. "If they wanted you dead, they would have fired already." Arden inhaled sharply. "They want me alive." Lyra glanced at him. "For what?" Before he could answer, the ship jolted violently. Warning sirens blared. The warship had locked onto them with a tractor beam. "We need to break free," Lyra snapped, switching to manual controls. "Hold on." The ship bucked, engines roaring as she attempted to pull them away, but the warship's grip was relentless. Arden clenched his fists, frustration boiling beneath his skin. He refused to be taken. Not again. Not ever. The symbols on his chest burned hotter. His breath hitched as a sensation, both alien and familiar, flooded through him. The ship wasn't just holding them. It was calling to him, and he could hear it. Arden closed his eyes, pushing past fear, past doubt, past the identity he had clung to for years. He was no longer just a man running from shadows. He was something more. The energy surged through him, golden light crackling across his skin. He reached out, not with his hands, but with his mind. The warship trembled. Lyra gasped, stepping back as the control panels flickered wildly. The tractor beam faltered, its glow pulsing erratically. The warship's own weapon systems powered down as if confused, uncertain. Arden's eyes snapped open, glowing like twin suns. Let us go. The command rippled through space itself. The warship shuddered, its hold breaking. The energy beam collapsed, and suddenly, Lyra's ship was free, tumbling away from its massive captor. Lyra gritted her teeth, seizing the opportunity. She punched the hyperdrive controls. Hold on. The stars stretched, and in an instant, they were gone, leaving the warship drifting in the void. Silence filled the cockpit. Arden slumped into the nearest chair, his breathing ragged. The glow in his eyes faded, the burning on his chest subsiding. Lyra stared at him, chest rising and falling. What the hell was that? Arden exhaled, running a hand through his hair. I don't know. He looked down at his hands, still trembling from the surge of power. But I think I just told them I'm not playing their game anymore. Lyra studied him for a long moment, then smirked. Good. Because neither am I. The ship sailed through hyperspace, leaving the past behind. But Arden knew the past wasn't done with him yet. No more running. No more hiding. Whatever he had been, whatever he was becoming, he would decide his own future. And if the galaxy had a problem with that, let it come.